This morning we're going to talk about healing. Healing has a variety of facets and a variety of ways in which it comes to us. We experience healing in body, in mind, in spirit, and also in community. All are ways in which we seek healing. And we know that Jesus sort of had that holistic approach to healing as he dealt with persons. We naturally think of healing for our bodies, and we remember the number of times in which Jesus healed. The lame that walk, the blind that saw. We remember God's and Jesus' concern for our bodies and for the healing of our bodies. We remember also how he was concerned for our minds as well and our mental health. There's a story told in the Gospels about Jesus going through a cemetery, and he finds a man that's chained to the tombs because he was rant and rage night and day. And the community was afraid of him. That's why he was chained to the tombs. And Jesus came and spoke with him and calmed him. And he was freed from his chains and returned to the community. Healed. I think this month was Mental Health Month. And in that regard, we remember those who are suffering from mental illness. And we pray for their healing. Jesus also was concerned for our spirit. And one of the things, as we'll speak in a few moments, is that when Jesus healed, one of the resistances, one of the roadblocks to healing was the concept of sin. And probably the words that Jesus spoke more than many, many others were, "You're forgiven. You're forgiven." And we need that peace and that renewal of our relationship with God on a spiritual level. And that also extends into the community. Because as Jesus said, as you have been forgiven, so you also need to forgive one another. And no relationship and no community can exist without that concept of forgiveness and grace. And Jesus was concerned about the community, the bringing together of persons of all different kinds, and he was oftentimes accused of associating with the wrong people. It broke community. It broke the bonds of the whole. And when we don't treat other people with dignity and respect, it breaks the peace of the community, and the anger that's engendered oftentimes comes back to bite us and to disturb our community. It affects our world peace when we don't respect each other. When one nation goes to grab the land of another nation, it breaks our peace. Jesus is concerned about community. And when we talk about healing, we talk about healing on all those levels: body, mind, spirit, and community. That brings us to the text for this morning. Jesus comes to the pools of Bethsaida. The background of the pools of Bethsaida is that when the waters were troubled, the first person to step in was healed. And so they gathered around the pool, and I'm sure they jostled for position so someone could be right at the edge of the pool, so when the water was troubled, they could step in. For only one was healed. I think that speaks to us today about the ways in which we exclude people from healing. Perhaps finances and status in life is one of the big issues. One of the churches I served had a person who moved to the States from Norway. And he said he was moving back home to Norway because the health care was much better there. They paid higher taxes than we do. I think their taxes at the time were about 40%. But they felt secure. They knew they would be taken care of from cradle to grave. They had a sense of peace. And Norway ranks among one of the happiest nations in the world. One of the happiest peoples. Because they experience healing throughout their lives on so many different ways. And it's extended to all, not the first person. Jesus is there and meets a man lying by the pool, waiting. And it's interesting, he asks him a question. Do you want to be healed? Do you want to be healed? Sort of sounds like a dumb question. and yet there are many roadblocks to healing. Many roadblocks. Not only those imposed upon us by the outside, but those imposed upon us internally. Sometimes it involves our mind, a new mindset. Because at Jesus' time, there was a mindset that said, illness is a punishment. It comes because you've sinned. It's God's justice. In my ministry, both in the parish and as a chaplain for hospice, I've come across many persons who were resistant to healing because of something in their mind, in their life, that they really messed up on. Some sin that took the forefront of their being and haunted them continually, so that they did not believe they deserved to be healed. That's a powerful force. That mental force in our being that affects our immune system. When you get depressed, when you're angry with yourself, you impede your healing. And so sometimes in healing, it is important to receive God's mercy and God's forgiveness. And often with persons, especially those that face that in life, I took the time in ministry to give them the opportunity of confession and the grace of forgiveness. Now, sometimes that extended further than just their relationship with God, because they were haunted by their relationship with others. And they felt they were not a good person. They were not worthy of the healing. And it was not until they made peace with another person that they could experience healing. Sometimes we also impede our own healing And I guess I should preface this by saying I see healing occurring in different ways. Different aspects of healing, different ways in which healing comes. The first way is what we all want: throw away the crutches and get up and walk. The other way that healing comes is as we adapt, as we adjust. I guess my best illustration of that seems to be that diabetic who takes their medicine, watches what they eat, gets a good balance of exercise and rest, and they can live a pretty normal life. But sometimes we resist that portion of healing that says we adapt and we adjust. I guess I come across the people that don't want to use a walker. What are other people going to think? Or I have to acknowledge that, oh gee, I can't do everything by myself and I'm not as independent as I thought I would be. And reaching out to other persons is another thing we don't want to do. We don't want to admit that we need somebody else. We don't want to admit that we can't do it all ourselves. And so we resist an aspect of healing, the dependence on other persons, or the dependence on other devices, or the dependence on medicine. Our own mindset gets in the way of healing. And we have to challenge that within our own being, or we impede God's healing touch. Another way healing comes, I believe, is through death and resurrection. With that in mind, especially as I work with hospice patients and their families, but even in the pastorate, we address that form of healing because we also want to resist that. I think a comedian, I wish I could remember his name, at one time said, "I'm not afraid of dying, I just don't want to be there when it happens." I think we all have that sense, especially a fear about the process of dying. Not necessarily always the fear of what happens afterwards, although some of us are troubled by that. But if we've experienced the grace of God's healing throughout life, it lowers that fear. And there comes a point in time when we can actually look forward to it. I often share with our patients and their families that sometimes life prepares us for death because it loses all joy, it loses all meaning. There's more suffering, and we don't have any hopes of it getting better anymore. And then we embrace death. And it's a form of healing when linked with resurrection. Healing comes in different ways. And we need to open ourselves to all the ways in which God brings healing. Now, the man's answers to Jesus was also interesting because he said, "There's no one to lift me in the pool. I can't get there." Again, going back to what I've suggested earlier, that need for community in healing. Because we need forces outside of ourselves. We need the resources of doctors and medicine. We need a caring community to assist us. One of the things I've been lifted up with, occasionally I'm downtrodden by it, but most of the time I've been lifted up to see the care that not only families, the immediate family, but extended families, cousins, nieces, in a few instances, aunts and uncles. Sometimes people that are friends a very close friend, a neighbor, making great sacrifices to care for and see that the needs of someone who is dying are met. The community role in our healing. The times when you go to the store for someone who's sick, you bring in the meal. You take them to the doctors. That's a form of healing. We need a government that brings healing to all persons and assists with that healing. Right now, especially with perhaps some of the changes that may be coming, the rural hospitals are really concerned. And some of them have already gone out of business because they depend on Medicare persons for their income. They don't have enough persons above that level to make up for the difference. Our healing depends on community, the communities in which we live, the nations in which we live. Community is part of our healing. And now we come to Jesus' response. He looks at the man and says, "Take up your pallet and walk." And the man does. He found someone who cared. He found someone to take the time and show him that he was a worthwhile individual, a worthwhile person, that he had some value in someone else's eye. And he got up and walked. Sins are forgiven, the barriers were taken away. Now he can walk. Healing has taken place. I pray for you, I pray for our nation, I pray for the world that the healing of body, mind, and spirit and community may abound in our lives and in our worlds. And what we can do to foster that, we will do in the name of Christ. So let it be.